Hello, 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 hello. All right, let's get situated here. Got everything okay. All right. Welcome to class. I am Dr. Michelle Taylor. Some of you know me as Feminista Jones. And this is the first of a four-part series that I am doing for Black History Month. I am excited for this. I'm so passionate about Black people. I am so passionate about teaching history. I'm focusing this month on African American history because some of you might not know, but during the summertime, I run a school called Sankofa Summer School. And during the summer, we do similar workshops and they cover people across the entire diaspora. So I definitely present an opportunity for people to learn about stories and histories and cultures from all over the world. For Black History Month, I decided to focus on African Americans. I use the term African American because I believe that the American represents the nationality and citizenship, and the African represents the culture. And I know that there's a lot of debate over that, and I actually don't care. I'm one of the people that actually loves being of African descent. And no matter where I am in this world, I'm always going to love being of African descent. And so the term African American for me is an Afrocentric term that honors my cultural heritage and makes note of my nationality. All right, so here's how this is going to go. I do have, slides and things like that. But if you've ever been a part of any of my classes or workshops, you know I like to talk. I like to give you context. I will say this, out of the four that I am doing, this is probably going to be the longest. I aim for an hour, but listen, this is a class that I usually teach over 16 weeks. Okay, so I just want to say it is impossible for me to capture everything that I want to capture in just an hour. So we might go a little bit over an hour, but I do invite you to stay until the end. If you are listening to this as a podcast version, you are going to miss out on some of the images and videos that I have, but you can always come and watch it later on. And if you're watching the replay, you won't be able to engage in the live portion at the end where there's a Q&A, but hopefully you'll be able to benefit from that. Excuse me. So, I'm sorry, y'all. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at some key events in history. We're going to look at some important moments. For example, the Harlem Renaissance. We're going to spend some time on the Harlem Renaissance, and you'll understand why in a minute. We're going to look at some dynamic queer African Americans, right? I'm going to do some highlights, some biographies, short biographies, talk about their contributions to culture, to history, all those wonderful things. We're going to talk a little bit about theory and practice and what does it mean to educate people about queer identity and what does that look like in these modern times. We'll talk a little bit about queer theory, particularly why I spelled it Kweer. Okay, so welcome, get settled in. We're going to have a good time. Excuse me, guys. I'm a little, I don't know, something's working in my nose passages or something. So just forgive me if I have to take a sip or what have you. Hopefully you'll understand. You are more than welcome to join in the chat. You are more than welcome to type things. I already see, Tamara, I see you there. You're definitely able to engage in that. If you have any questions along the way, you can actually ask them and I'll see if I can pause and address them. Okay. All right. So we always have to go back to the beginning, right? Okay. So we have to consider that, ancient Egyptian is like many cultures and all those kinds of things. I, as an Afrocentric scholar, we always go back to Africa, right? We always go back to the cradle of civilization. This is not to say that we don't acknowledge that other people are doing different things, but we all know that, come on, everything begins in Africa, right? And so one of the places we like to go to is this area in the Nile River, known as Kemet, known as Kush, known as these areas where Africans were there. And while some people may try to deny that there were no Black Africans there, we know for sure, based on even the white historians of the time, that the people there were Black. You can look at images that they have. Actually, let me make this a little bit bigger so you can actually see my slides. Okay. So you see on the left, there's an image of two people. They are call them rust colored, brown, whatever you want to call them. Those are Black people. I don't care what anybody says. But we're kind of digging into that. And the reason why I always start there is just to emphasize the fact that queerness has always existed. Okay. It has always existed. There are people that will say that, you know, Africans are not gay. That's a European import and all those kinds of things. That is absolutely not true. Queerness has existed for as long as humanity has existed, and it's kind of messed up to try to deny that. Here's a little short clip that I want to play for you. With my videos, sometimes I do have technical difficulties. So if for some reason you cannot hear it, just put in the chat, can't hear, and then I'll try to figure it out, okay? All right.
Specifically for this month is the tale of Horus and Set, which is told on a papyrus discovered by Petrie at Lahun. It dates from the 12th dynasty and tells the tale of Horus and Set wrangling over control of Egypt following the death of the god Osiris. After many years of this wrangling, Set decides to change his tack and attempts to bed the god Horus, flattering him, telling him that he has beautiful buttocks and muscular thighs. It's particularly fascinating that this oldest recorded chat-up line in history actually appears to be a gay chat-up line. We also have this relief from Coptos, which shows the name of the king, Neferkare Pepi II. We have a tale from a much later period of Egyptian history, which the noted Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner described as being quite within the spirit of Herodotus. It relates the story of the king Pepi II clambering up a ladder into his general Sassanet's home late at night and staying there for 4 hours, only leaving after he has done what he desired of him.
Okay, so I'm going to pause it there. Because not only are we getting some history, we're also getting tea, okay? And you know I love tea, okay? So basically, the story is that now some have said that there may have been sexual violence there. Some say it may have been consensual. So we don't actually know. But it's interesting that this is kind of documented. He calls it a gay chat line. That's hilarious to me. Like some of the oldest writing we have is men flirting with each other, right? Again, these are Black people. I don't care what anybody tries to tell you, right? But then there's also another story that is often looked at, and I always mess up these names, but just rock with me. Nian Kunum and Khnumhotep. And they are said to be buried together, their bodies embracing each other as lovers. Now, some people try to argue and say, well, they were brothers and what have you, but they were also identified as being married to women as well. So if that was the case, they would bury them with their wives ahead of family members as per their choice. But these two men chose to be buried together in an embrace, which suggests that they were in a very strong romantic loving relationship. Okay. There's other things that were coming out. Sometimes you would see writing about kind of men taking on other men's essence, and essence is kind of code for semen, right? Because they believed that the man's power and vitality was in his seminal fluid. And they would talk about rituals and times in which men would drink each other's. Okay, I know this is okay. If you have kids, I'm so sorry, but we have to talk about these kinds of things. I said it's for 12 up, so you know this is historical stuff. All right, so they were gay, and it's okay. It's okay to be gay. And I think that when we're talking about what happens in the beginning, again, we always look for proof of these things. And it becomes a little bit difficult, I'm not going to lie, particularly as we move forward. So I start us there. We understand that there was what we call the Ma'afa, which is Kiswahili for the Great Disaster. You may know it as the transatlantic slave trade. We talk about it in that way because we want to make sure that people understand this was a Holocaust, right? An African Holocaust. It was a destruction of cultures and a theft unlike anything else in the world, right? So then we will move to the colonies, right? So we're talking about people being in the colonies. Now, we don't have tangible, like, documented narratives or what have you about people possibly being same gender loving. But we do have evidence of queerness. And it's important to understand that sometimes queerness shows up as refusal. Sometimes it shows up as gender bending, for lack of a better word, right? And so when you think about like Sadia Hartman, you think of some other folks who are in the Afro-pessimist movement. When we talk about how Africans were denied humanity, therefore inherently denied gender, what does it mean to be gender bending, or what does it mean to be man or woman under enslavement when you're treated as though you are an object and objects aren't gendered, right? That's a whole other conversation. But I think it's important to understand that there are ways that enslaved people queered their lives, right? And one example that we do have, like this idea of cross-dressing for survival, right? So we have this idea of Ellen Craft, and this was a Black woman, right, who was extremely light-skinned. We all know why. And she was married to a man, William Craft, and they were able to escape because she presented as a white man. Okay. And so for survival, she bended gender, right? She cross-dressed. She passed herself as a man to pretend that she was her husband's owner. And that is how they were able to escape. And so when we think about that, right, we think about how dynamic that is, right? That is like, whoo, you know? And again, this is a couple that was together, they were romantically involved, but they relied on kind of queering this notion of gender in order to survive, right? And so it makes us think about queerness as a practice and not just an identity, but also a way of being, right? And there's a good book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. I read it last year. Go pick that up if you want to read a historical kind of fiction about their lives. And I think that we just have to think about over time, because when we're about to slide into the Harlem Renaissance and things like that. When we think about that, we have to think about the ways that Black people, African Americans, subverted, you know, the dominant culture, how they subverted patriarchy, how they subverted heteronormativity in ways that were not always open, but that didn't make it any less subversive, right? Okay. So let's get into some of the early folks that we do know of, people that we have documentation of, right? So we have Frances E.W. Harper. I love talking about her. She was an abolitionist, a suffragist, and she's considered the mother of African-American journalism. She was a poet, a novelist, a lecturer. She was a social reformer. She was born free in 1825. She's from Baltimore in the house, okay? And she was raised by her husband, who was a pastor. She published several poetry collections. Like, she was a really prolific poet. And then she left Maryland because the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 made it very difficult for free African Americans to exist without paranoia, right? And so a lot of people ended up like moving north, or they ended up moving around. And so she became a traveling lecturer. And so one thing that did was that, you know, gave some credibility to her claim that she was free, and two, it kept her out of, you know, kind of harm's way. So I love to talk about her because she also worked with the Freedmen's Bureau, and I talk a lot about Reconstruction in another class that I have. But she was also somebody who addressed race and gender and within the Reconstruction. So when we talk about things like, you know, you'll hear some people say, oh, you know, Black feminism, that's only because of white people and white women turned y'all against us. I like to point to people like Frances E.W. Harper. I point to people like Sojourner Truth and others because they were bringing in this intersectionality, right? This idea of we must consider race and gender when we're talking about abolition and liberation and all those kinds of things. And remember, she was born in 1825. So this is old. She helped found the National Association of Colored Women. She died in Philadelphia. She was superintendent, but before she died, she was superintendent of the colored section of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania Women's Christian Temperance Union, and a bunch of other organizations. She was about that life. Okay. And so I think that we should always honor her. There's another woman, Ruth Ellis, who is also around this early period. She was considered a safe haven mother, but she was born in 1899 in Illinois. Shout out to the folks in Springfield, Illinois. She was definitely politically engaged. Around the time, like the latter quarter of the 19th century, was a hotbed of activism for sure. And so she is considered the oldest out Black lesbian, okay? She came out in 1915 and definitely had the support of her family. And so I just want to let you know, to give you some context, 1915 is when Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith came out, and this sparked the rise of the Klan. So not only was she an African-American woman, she was an African-American lesbian at a time where white people were, again, starting to hunt Black people. She moved to Detroit in the 1930s, and she was a print entrepreneur and photographer. Back in this time, printing and newspapers and periodicals and all those kinds of journalism, all those things were popular for educated African Americans. She opened the first home there for Black queer people, and she created a safe space. It became known as Ruth's House. So we talk about mutual aid and community support. We have to look at Ruth Ellis as one of the leaders and groundbreaking activists who did this, and she created safe space for disenfranchised queer people. And as you might imagine, at this particular time, particularly when African Americans are really deeply clinging to the church and this notion that we have to be good Black people and we have to do the right things so that white people will leave us alone, you can imagine that there were queer people who were being kicked out of their homes and, you know, pushed out from their families. So we like to thank her and honor her for creating space for all those displaced queer Black people. So let's move to the Harlem Renaissance. I love teaching this part. I can't teach enough about the Harlem Renaissance being gay as hell. I don't mean to cuss. I'm just saying that the Harlem Renaissance was gay as hell. Like, and there's no way around it, right? The architects of the Harlem Renaissance, the most integral figures, the key people of the Harlem Renaissance were gay. Okay. And yes, we love to talk about the Renaissance. We love to talk about that period. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but we love talking about it. But there's no way we can talk about this without talking about how incredibly gay it is. Okay. So some people I like to talk about, listen, controversial mixy self, Alan Locke, brilliant man, right? But he's considered the father of the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, we've got a Gladys Bentley. She was a drag king, well-known cabaret performer, right? 1920s, 1930s. She was known, again, we're talking about gender bending, the queering of gender expression. She would often wear tuxedos. She would flirt with women while she was on stage. She lived out loud as a masculine presenting lesbian, who we would call a stud today, or maybe an AG if you are in New York. But definitely one of the first Black most popular gender nonconforming performers in America. And the reason why I say one of, because there were other people that were doing this, and we're talking like deep in the undergrounds. This stuff was happening already. So she's popular because she gained popularity in the space that she was, but there were others. And unfortunately, around the 1950s, especially when we start getting McCarthyism and all these other kinds of like super conservative, Norman Rockwell kinds of American ideas, she was basically pressured to renounce her sexuality. And then we ended up seeing her wearing dresses and all that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of reflects the hostility that people experience. You have Alelia Walker. She was the daughter of C.J. Walker. She was the queer trap house lady. And I say that because this lady threw a party, okay? And she created safe social spaces for all the queer Black folks of the Renaissance to come and do what they want to do. No, it wasn't just attended by queer people, but if you came to those parties, you understood that there were going to be studs and sissies and all kinds of stuff going on there, transvestites, as they used to call it. Everybody was going to be there, and everybody was welcome. And so you could not be in her space if you were not welcome. She was also queer herself, and this caused some friction between her and her mother. We also had Langston Hughes. There's a lot to be said about Langston Hughes, but one of the things that some folks have kind of settled on was that he was likely asexual but homo-romantic, right? And so what that means is probably he did not have a high desire for sex and probably didn't act on it much, but he definitely had some romantic feelings, and they were for men. Now, y'all want some tea? Okay, I'm gonna give you some tea. Now we got L.A. Locke and we got Langston Hughes. And this is my favorite. I love talking about the tea. We always got gay tea because gay people are tea. All right. So we have some poems that Langston Hughes wrote, but he also wrote to, excuse me, Langston Hughes. I got this, and there's a connection between him and County Cullen and Alain Locke. I should like to know you, and I hope you'll write me again. Hughes wrote innocently enough in an early letter to Locke. And by April 6th, my birthday, 1923, he was asking his friend, County Cullen, is Mr. Locke married? In fact, Locke was assuredly not married. In a letter to Locke sent in May 1923, Hughes wrote, I'm going to have some pictures taken this week, one from Mr. Curlin's Negro Poets, and I shall send one to you. Then, if we meet on some strange road in summer, we shall recognize one another. And do you like Walt Whitman's poetry? His Song of the Open Road and poems in Calamus? Let me find out he was sending him pictures. Trying to be like, this is what I look like. Holla at your boy. And if you actually go and read the poems, they are very gay. So what he was doing in this space, right, was what we talk about. I'm going to be serious, y'all. When we talk about subversion, secrecy, all these kinds of things, you're talking about some of the best writers we've ever had. Of course, they're writing in code, they're writing in hidden language and things like that. So if we look at the poem Cafe 3 a.m. by Langston Hughes, he says, detectives from the Vice Squad with weary, sadistic eyes, spotting fairies, degenerates, some folks say, but God, nature, or somebody made them that way. Police lady or lesbian over there, where, right? Observation of how queer people were subjected to state-sanctioned violence, right? The police. And when he's talking about fairies, he's not talking about, what's the one from Peter Pan? Y'all know what I'm talking about. He's not talking about that. This is what they call gay men, right? Fairies, right? And so he's talking about this, right? This fear, this kind of paranoia. And then in Desire, when he's talking about being Black and queer, right? Desire to us was like a double death, right? Swift dying of our mingled breath, evaporation of an unknown strange perfume between us quickly in a naked room, right? And these are two of the poems that people kind of look at. Tinkerbell, yes, thank you. This is kind of two of the poems that people look at when they are citing kind of his queer leanings, right? So, so here's one of the things that I love, and I recommend this for anybody that is interested in studying history, especially African American history. Read people's letters. Read the letters they write to each other. So much history is in their correspondence, okay? Just my own pro tip. All right, so I mentioned County Cullen. County Cullen was a prominent poet. He was a Guggenheim Fellowship winner. Has wrote so many wonderful things. I don't know if any of you read Harlem Rhapsody. He's a figure in there connected with Jesse Faust, who was also connected with W.E.B. Du Bois. And there was some tea there as well. But County Cullen, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant poet, okay? Then we have Bessie Smith and Gertrude Ma Rainey. These are women who ushered blues into the public space, right? Blues music was definitely underground and low-key or what have you. It was actually women that helped put it on the map and popularized it. And Bessie Smith and Gertrude Ma Rainey were two of those women. One of the songs that Gertrude Ma Rainey has, she sings, she says, went out last night, had a great big fight. Everything seemed to go on wrong. I looked up. To my surprise, the gal I was with was gone. Where she went, I don't know. I mean to follow everywhere she goes. Folks say I'm crooked. I didn't know where she took it. I want the whole world to know. They say I do it. Ain't nobody caught me. Sure got to prove it on me. Went out last night with a crowd of my friends. They must have been women because I don't like no men. Gertrude Von Rainey had no problem talking about this. I'm going to say I didn't like Viola Davis playing her because, whatever. But Gertrude Von Rainey was that girl too. She wasn't playing around. And so she wrote, songs like this. And there's a lot that kind of goes into queering the blues itself being queer music because it kind of queers American folk music. We look at County Cullen. He has this poem here. I tell him when he comes, she said, body and baggage to go. Though the night be darker than my hair and the ground be hard with snow. But when he came with his gay black head thrown back and lips apart, she flipped the light hair from his coat and sobbed against his heart, right? So it's a poem about a woman who realizes that her husband is having an affair with another man and probably a white man, right? So, what have you. But the reason I have him here with W.E.B. Du Bois, I don't know if anybody knows the connection between the two of these. But hey, yes, this gay man marries W.E.B. Du Bois's daughter, Yvonne. Yes. Yolande, why I say Yvonne? Yolande. Yeah, you can look at this picture here and know that he's gayer than Christmas. But, white people weren't the only ones marrying power families and things like that, right? So, yeah, very much a lavender marriage, okay? All right. But what I was talking about, the sissification of the blues, right? This is one of the, and if you follow me on socials, you know that one of my biggest critiques of the film Sinners was the lack of the sissy character, right? All these other people were there at the juke joint, but it's very hard to believe that at a juke joint like that in Mississippi in 1932, that there wasn't going to be at least one sissy there or one gay person there, right? And so I just want to play a little bit so you can kind of hear Sissy Man. This is Sissy Man Blues by Kokomo Arnold.
I believe I'll go back home. I believe I'll go back home. Lord, and knowledge to my good gal, mama. Lord, and I have done you wrong. I'm gonna ring up China, yeah, man. See, can I find my good gal over there? Riding, Kokomo, riding. I'm gonna ring up China. See, can I find my good gal over there? Says the good book tells me that I got a good gal in this world somewhere. All in the church bell is toning, yeah, man, on one Sunday morning. Boy, that's old Kokomo.
So I'm going to pause. You can go listen to it, but basically he's talking about how he is compelled to find a good woman. The church is telling him, his friends are telling him, but all he wants is a man. So there's that. And so there's also there's other ones. You can also kind of just look up Sissy Blues. But I think it's just so important. Again, Ma Rainey is talking about a BD woman's blues, and that's a bull dagger. And if you know what that language is, she considered herself that as well. All right, so we can exit the Harlem Renaissance, because while I could go on and on and on and on about it, I want us to move forward to more to the activism of the mid-20th century. Okay, so I'll let you hear a little bit of this. This is Audre Lorde, There's No Hierarchy of Oppression.
There is no hierarchy of oppressions by Audre Lorde. I was born Black and a woman. I am trying to become the strongest person I can become, to live the life I have been given, and to help effect change toward a livable future for this earth and for my children. As a Black, lesbian, feminist, socialist, poet, mother of 2, including 1 boy and member of an interracial couple, I usually find myself part of some group in which the majority defines me as deviant, difficult, inferior, or just plain wrong.
Okay, so that kind of sets the tone for like where we're going, right? In terms of what this activism brought about. We start recognizing, well, our folks start recognizing that we can't just focus on being Black. Like being Black is great, but there's so many other things that make us who we are, and that we are not going to get true freedom and liberation without considering all of these things, right? All right. So then we have a James Baldwin. James Baldwin, now, most people have heard of James Baldwin. He was born in New York City. At first, he was raised by a single mom, but then his mom got married, had more children. He went to Dwight Clinton. Excuse me, DeWitt, but we call it Dwight Clinton. He grew up in a deeply religious household. He began writing at an early age, wanted to be a playwright, all these other things. James Baldwin grappled with his sexuality. Early on, he really struggled with it, and he eventually finds like refuge within the church, as many queer people do. And that's why we get a book like Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is my favorite James Baldwin book. If you haven't read it, go give it a read. We get The Fire Next Time. We get Giovanni's Room. He is somebody, I mean, definitely like one of the strongest cultural commentators we had. Really, like, I think, I tend to think of Baldwin as ushering in a new era of intellectual activism, right? Not necessarily marching in the streets, that is needed, not necessarily doing direct actions, that is needed, but really challenging, Eurocentric universality, right? Debating with people, questioning them, challenging them to think differently, right? Angela Davis said, in order to change the society, you have to change people's minds. And I think that James Baldwin ushers in this kind of new era of like Black intelligentsia, right, in the activist spaces. And so there are other people that are like him. Audre Lorde is one, and we'll talk, we're going to talk about her. He ends up moving to Florida. I mean, not Florida, God. He moves to Paris. As many Black people ended up doing to escape the tyranny of the United States. There was a hopelessness that took over when they did not believe that freedom was coming. And so they went and found it where they could at least try. So I want you to hear Audre Lorde speaking for herself. Here she is talking about what it was like to be gay in the 50s.
Women I ran with, we knew we were outsiders. We knew we were outside the pale. We lived in the village. We were outsiders. We were dykes, right? A lot of us were artists. We hated typing, right? We didn't want straight jobs. Whatever we did, we were at the fringe. Now, this, of course, was the 50s. It was like the gay girls' version of the beatniks. You have to remember that the lesbian gay girls, because that's what we would call the gay girls population, was a reflection of what else was going on, right, around us. And that was the era of let's pretend this is the best of all possible worlds. This is exactly what we choose, right? And this is it. So like nobody talked about racism.
Right. So if something happened to me in a bar, I couldn't count on anybody standing up and covering my back. A white lesbian would not stand up to cover my back. They may say, personally, oh, isn't that too bad it happened to you? But not, hey, this shouldn't happen, period.
You need to begin with a movement, which is what Black Power and the Civil Rights Movement was. Then, immediately within it, you are going to get those people whose differences are not being articulated, which is, right, us. So then there is immediately another step.
Okay, so what we get from this, right, is that this is when we start, again, having more open conversations about these intersecting identities, all right? So a little bit about Audre Lorde, for those who are not as familiar. Her parents were immigrants from the Caribbean. I'm always going to say these things because, unfortunately, there are some people who believe that immigrants and first generation people do not count as African Americans. Audre Lorde was absolutely an African American. Okay, she was raised here. She was raised in this culture. She did all the things that the local Black folks do. That's an African American woman. But anyway, she went to Hunter High School, Hunter College. I also went to Hunter College, one of my schools. She also went to Columbia University. She was married to a white gay man with whom she had 2 children. Nice little lavender marriage situation. She was a librarian before she became a poet in residence at Tougaloo College. She wrote poetry, prose, essays. She was known for her critical race theorizing, feminist theorizing. She published several books, including Sister Insider, which I teach in pretty much every class I have, Zami, A New Spelling of My Name, and The Black Unicorn. She was a member of the Combahee River Collective. And one of the things that she said that I think resonates is she said, my sexuality is part and parcel of who I am. And my poetry comes from the intersection of me and my worlds, right? So now we're starting to get people being out and proud, right? And speaking of the Combahee River Collective, okay, they were Barbara Smith, Beverly Smith, Margot Okazawa Ray, Cheryl Clark, Demita Frazier, Audre Lorde, Chirlane McCray, and Akasha Gloria Hall. And these women would get together, and there were others that were also a part of this movement that they had. But basically, what started out in the Boston area were these women getting together and hosting these kinds of think tank salons, right? We just need to do more of this, I gotta say. But they would get together, I think like every week or every other week at a local community center. And they would charge each other, hey, bring your notes, bring what you've been thinking about, bring some of your ideas about liberation. At this time, you know, Boston is still dealing with the woes of desegregation and how white people are not trying to have that. Also, there was a series of murders of Black women at this time. A lot of stuff was going on. It's also the women's movement. Black Power movement is still kind of fighting on. So they decided to get together. This is a picture of them for their first retreat. This picture is also a reminder to document everything that you do so that in the future, people will have photographs and primary sources to go look back at. So they got together and they came up and developed this statement, the Combahee River Collective Statement. And here's what they said about it. The most general statement of our politics at the present time would be that we are actively committed to struggling against racial, sexual, and heterosexual and class oppression, and see as our particular task the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that the major systems of oppression are interlocking. And that's how we end up getting this Black Feminist Manifesto from the Combahee River Collective Statement. Please go look it up. There are many copies of it online. You don't have to pay for it, what have you. It is really important to read this and see what came out of it. So I want you to listen real quick on the origin of identity politics from Barbara Smith, who was one of the members of the collective.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue to look at the in the country, and now we move to states of far more diversity, Nevada.
The article that was in The Guardian, it's important for people to know that I was born into Jim Crow. I was born in 1946, so Jim Crow was a law of the land during that time, during my growing up years. And the reason it's important, I think, is because it shaped very much who I was and my perspective on this project of U.S. democracy that we're still trying to improve. I've lived on the East Coast for many years. I teach and write, and probably more important than even those other things is that I've been involved in movements for social justice since the 1960s. I joined the civil rights movement as a teenager. And even though I lived in the North, the Congress of Racial Equality and other civil rights organizations were strong in Cleveland. And as I said, I got involved as a teenager. And from that day to this, I've been politically active and working for positive political social justice and change.
So I always like to make sure you hear from these people. Barbara Smith is still with us, okay? She is, you know, somebody who has definitely fought for our freedom, our liberation, and she is gay. Okay. I want to talk about Pat Parker. Pat Parker, okay? Groundbreaking African-American lesbian poet, a feminist, activists. And if you start noticing a theme, it is because at this time, the women's lib movement is really big. And there are Black women who are feeling like, hey, don't forget about us, like you did the last time with the whole voting thing. But then we're also seeing, because of how the culture of, within the United States is shifting, that, there are more connections being made across races and cultures on things like being gay, right? Excuse me. And other things. More white women are reaching out and working alongside Black women in ways that they had not done like 50 years earlier, right? So this is important, right? Pat Parker, gotta drop this poem on you. I got to, because she was spitting hot fire.
For the straight folks who don't mind gays but wish they weren't so blatant. Some people got a lot of nerve. Sometimes I don't believe the things I see and hear. Have you met the woman who's shocked by two women kissing and in the same breath tells you that she's pregnant? But gays shouldn't be blatant. Or this straight couple sits next to you in a movie and you can't hear the dialogue because of the sound effects. But gays shouldn't be blatant. And the woman in your office spends your whole lunch hour talking about her new bikini drawers and how much her husband likes them. But gays shouldn't be blatant. Or the hip chick in your class rattling a mile a minute while you're trying to get stoned in the john about the camping trip she took with her musician boyfriend. But gays shouldn't be blatant. You go in a public bathroom and all over the walls there's John loves Mary, Janice did Richard, Pepe loves Dolores, etc. But gays shouldn't be blatant. Or you go to an amusement park and there's a tunnel of love and pictures of straights painted on the front and grinning couples coming in and out, but gays shouldn't be blatant. The fact is, blatant heterosexuals are all over the place. Supermarkets, movies, at work, in church, in books, on television every day and night, every place, even in gay bars. And they want gay men and women to go hide in the closets. So to you straight folks, I say, sure, I'll go if you go too, but I'm polite, so after you.
Hot fire, right? Pat Parker calling them out, right? And I think what we start to see is that Black queer people are challenging the norms of society in ways that maybe white people are not able to yet, because whiteness is still a thing. And so we start seeing these Black lesbians, particularly the Black lesbian feminists, are the ones kind of really speaking up. And Pat Parker, came from Texas, and being gay in the South, in the Southwest, is no joke, especially when you're Black. But she definitely was somebody who was fighting for freedom from homophobia and racism and sexism. Then we get Florence Kennedy. Florence Kennedy, if you have not heard her name, you should. Go look her up. Look up some of her videos. She's definitely this very flamboyant, out there, kind of loud. Here I am woman, hear me roar type. She was a lesbian feminist activist, co-founder of the National Black Feminist Organization. If this is the first time you're hearing about this, I recommend you go look it up. She was also founder of the Feminist Party. And if you think that sounds familiar, it is because it is the Feminist Party who propelled Shirley Chisholm into the presidential election. Okay, that's Florence Kennedy right there. That's my girl. We have Margaret Sloan Hunter. Margaret Sloan Hunter is also a co-founder of the National Black Feminist Organization. So she's connected with Kennedy. She's one of the early editors of Ms. magazine, and she helped organize the Berkeley Women's Center for Feminist and Feminist School for Girls, one of the first of its kind. She's from Chicago, Illinois. And I like to point out where people are from, just to show that this stuff was happening all over the country, right? It was not isolated, maybe in New York or, definitely not in Atlanta. Don't take no tea. Took a while for Atlanta to come around, right? But they were very civil rights religious, kind of churchy. But this was happening in other cities. She was very much active in the civil rights movement. And her work with Ms. Magazine really started to amplify the diverse voices. And so she was really awesome, and I love her. We got to hear from Angela Davis. How do we not have Angela Davis in this, right? For those who don't know, Angela Davis was an activist, prominent activist, member of the Communist Party, but not a member of the Black Panther Party. That's something that folks don't necessarily know. She has been a prison abolitionist. She is alive still. She's with us. I just saw her last June at a conference. She is doing well. You know, she's in her 80s now. She's an elder. You know, but she has definitely given us a lot to think about when it comes to the intersections of race, gender, and class and sexuality.
Emailer Damien asked the question, should the civil rights struggle be linked with the gay rights struggle, as many of the quote-unquote Black leaders are leaning towards? As a person who is also African American and gay, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think that that the civil rights movement during the 1960s created a terrain. It created a terrain that allowed many groups and communities to think about particular issues of discrimination and domination. Certainly the women's movement, as it developed in the 60s, would not have been possible without the backdrop of the civil rights movement. And, you know, certainly the movement of women of color, certainly the gay, lesbian, now bisexual, transgender movement would not have been conceptualized in the same way had it not happened against the backdrop of civil rights, the civil rights movement.
So that's just really the part that I want you to hear. You can go and you can, you know, you can go and watch this. It's only a few more minutes, but this is really important, right? Kind of seeing how the civil rights movement itself, yes, we tend to think of it primarily as benefiting African Americans, led by African Americans, things like that. But all of these other movements, subsequent movements that have come since, are based on the blueprint of the civil rights movement. And so when we're talking about the women's movement and the queer rights movement, the part of why they are as successful as they are, or they have, you know, they push the needles forward, is because of the African Americans that were involved, who were also part of this civil rights and this Black Power movement, right? And so it's just kind of giving credit where it's due. And if we think about how in the civil rights movement there were queer people involved in that, it's all connected, right? We don't get a lot of the liberties and freedoms that we have today were it not for African American activists, right? And speaking of one, Bayard Rustin. I have been deep in my Bayard Rustin bag over the last couple of weeks. I've always been so fascinated by him. People say that he was openly gay, but I'm not sure I agree. But, you know, fact check me, bro. Like, because I think that it was known, but he was never in that space of being like a queer rights activist, right? Everything that he was focused on really was about Black liberation. And so it's more like, I happen to be gay, if that makes sense, right? But we have to talk about him. He definitely was the chief architect of the 1963 March on Washington. But people say that he was sidelined because he was gay. Again, I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think that he was like a stage manager type. Dr. King was getting all the love from everybody, right? So I think that that was part of the focus. I also don't think that he necessarily was striving for that kind of accolade because he already had support and accolades. You know what I'm saying? So he was also a Quaker. And it's interesting, I have to bring that up because Bayard Rustin credited his being a Quaker for his activism more than him being Black or more than him being gay. Okay. He was arrested for draft dodging or whatever, like federal, like he, you know, was a conscientious objector, but he later goes and says that if he had known what was going on, like with the Nazis and stuff during World War II, he might not have been a conscientious objector. He might have actually gone to war to fight. It's interesting. This is what I'll say. He was called out, excuse me. by somebody, you know, he was called out, and we'll talk, the next person we're going to talk about speaks to this as well, because people have said that he's the reason that there were no women on the list to speak at the March on Washington. And so there is conversation that he was gay, but also, you know, a bit of a misogynist, which is a really kind of tension, a tender tension that we have to consider. Because yes, gay men can be sexist, right? But it doesn't matter at this point. He's dead. So what are we going to do? And then it was a question of whether or not he was neoconservative or pragmatist, because he ends up becoming someone who is he ends up becoming like this staunch anti-communism, like I don't want to say activist or what have you. But he wouldn't endorse Senator McGovern because he was running on an anti-war thing. Like it's not that he supported the Vietnam War, but he didn't think that people should be taking this anti-war stance. He took on what some considered conservative views, but then others considered being pragmatic, in the sense that he was more like, we have to work with this government. We have to work alongside them. We can't keep pounding at things. And it was interesting because he did this address to the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, and he was basically condemning the younger Black folks who were like coming up in this Black Power movement and things like that, and we're talking about, you know, their aversion to Jewish people, things like that, and he was definitely condemning that. He was condemning them. And, you know, he started saying some things that made people feel like maybe he was no longer on their side. And I think he got together, he created this Black Americans to Support Israel Committee. And that's, again, we're looking at this hindsight 2020. Dr. King also supported Israel's right to exist. All these things. I don't know where he would stand right now. He might be a Zionist. He might be anti-genocidist. I don't know, but it's complicated, and I think that's important. We have Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was born Anna Pauline Murray, but Pauli Murray changed their name to Pauli, and I think it was kind of to represent their gender identity and expression. And the reason I say this is because I'm going to use the term she, because most of her work is done in she, and we want to honor that, and it is what it is. But a lot of people do believe that Pauli was probably what we would call transgender today, very much masculine presenting. There were documents that she had, some of her writings really kind of questioned her gender and talked about her having some conflict over her gender. But at this time that she was active and also being within the church, we're not sure that there was space for her to identify as such. She coined the term Jane Crow. Okay. And she believed that demonstrated that the Jim Crow laws also negatively affected African-American women, which if you study our movements and stuff like that, you know that there's been a prioritization of Black men. And so a lot, again, at this time, we're starting to see more and more women speaking up and more queer people speaking up and being like, hold up, we exist, right? So in 1963, she became one of the first people to criticize the sexism in the civil rights movement. And she wrote this speech, The Negro Woman in Quest of Equality. Please go look it up. The Negro Woman in Quest of Equality. Go read that. And then she wrote a letter to A. Philip Randolph criticizing the fact that the March on Washington did not include any women, and that as leaders, and the women had to walk separate and all these other things. She had a problem. And what she said was this: I have been increasingly perturbed over the blatant disparity between the major role which Negro women have played and are playing in the crucial grassroots levels of our struggle, and the minor role of the leadership they have been assigned in the national policy-making decisions. It is indefensible to call a national march on Washington and send out a call which contains the name of not a single woman leader. Okay, shout out to her. And she's a lawyer, and she's working with the NAACP, and she is the first African-American woman ordained as an Episcopal priest. But again, I'm referring to these feminine terms because that is how her life has been documented. But there is a possibility, there's a lot of like evidence that suggests she may have been a they or even possibly a he. Okay, but we just honor it the way that it is. Okay. So Stonewall, we're talking about an event that happens, right? So Stonewall riots of 1969, New York City, okay? Stonewall Inn was a popular gay bar in Greenwich Village. The police were regularly raiding queer spaces. They had a lot of same-sex dancing, a lot of drag performances, a lot of gender non-conforming people were criminalized for these, just for existing and doing these things. The police department often, they came in like damn near every night and were harassing them. And this led to a lot of tensions, okay? And so then one night, a woman named Stormé DeLarverie, who was a drag king, also did security at the Stonewall Inn. She's from New Orleans. Yeah, that's why she got that light yellow skin. I always joke. I'm like, that's a damn Creole. That's a damn passe blanc right there. But coming up from New Orleans, moving up there, right? Had to deal with a lot of racism and the sexism and the homophobia, right? That is kind of like the triple, the triple conundrum that we have to deal with. And so she started doing male impersonation. She started wearing like tuxedos, dressing as men. She was known as one of the first people to be physically assaulted by the police and to resist. And they cite her as sparking the rebellion. So the story goes that they came in, they attacked her, she resisted, other people joined in to help and try to protect her. And then bricks were thrown and bottles were thrown. And this kind of kicks off the riots, okay? But Stormé died in 2014 and was celebrated in her life. So I want to make sure people know that. One of those people who was throwing things was our own Marsha P. Johnson. Very much, we know Marsha P. At least more people are talking about Marsha P. Johnson these days. But she's considered the mother of LGBTQ pride. I always like to show this video of Marsha, and it's an interview, and I just think it's really cute.
There she is, the lady in red.
The lady in red, but this isn't a colored can. Turn around, you're on TV, Marsha.
The shameless hussy.
No, she's doing the laundry. See, this is what a poor colored girl trying to look like an elegant butleress looks like.
I passed for white.
See? Oh, you should see her when she puts it all on. She got the black pants and the white shirt. She was like a real
Did you see this morning's treatment? Didn't you love that?
What was this morning's treatment?
With the little hairdo and everything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, she had her Valentine's outfit on today.
Wonderful. Byron missed it.
Who wanted you to be their Valentine, Marsha?
Well, I'm going to the Valentine ball
Where?
Friday. I got another date tomorrow.
Another date.
With
See?
Bernardo.
Look at her. Another
With
date.
Bernardo.
Her last boyfriend dropped her last week.
Why?
Yeah.
We're having a very hard time marrying her off. An old colored girl's hard to get rid of.
Okay, so, we're getting along here, but just kind of like seeing Marsha in her space with people that loved her and getting to be her free self, definitely considered an icon. And so go on to be a speaker, go on to like really kind of address these issues. And this kind of ushers in, I think when we think about Marsha P. Johnson, we think about, kind of what happened at Stonewall. There was an underground culture and community of queer people who had to find community, right? Again, they are dealing with the tensions of religiosity in their own family, the rejection of family members who are ashamed of them, think that what they're doing is sinful and demonic and all those things, but also just don't really know what to do. And so as people are navigating the Black Power movement and the civil rights movement, they're not seeing themselves represented in these movements, being queer people, being transgender people, or what have you. And that's not to say that everybody was antagonistic. There were some people who were speaking out on behalf. A lot of people would say, oh, the Panthers were homophobic. Some of them were, but Huey P. Newton has a known statement that he made basically saying that homosexuals deserve to be part of this liberation movement as well. So we're starting to see this underground culture be created, and what ends up happening is then we get ballroom culture. Now, ballroom culture is something that I love to read about, study, and I've even written about it, and I've published about ballroom culture, partly because when I was a little girl, my mama was friends with all the queer people, and I don't want to say little girl, like I would say more around like 10, 11, what have you. And so I kind of grew up around these folks. I grew up with going to places. I didn't realize it then. Didn't realize that I was going to someone's house, right? And it was just a house, but also a house, right? A place where they created these spaces for queer people to come together, form families, and really find themselves, and also live and enjoy life and do the best that they can. You might want to watch, if you haven't seen the television show Pose. Pose takes an inside look into, well, a historical fiction look at ballroom culture. It started in Harlem, right? It really grew in Harlem, New York City at large, between the 1960s and the 1980s. It was definitely like hip hop in the sense that it was a response to racism, poverty, and exclusion. But also it's because Black and Latino folks felt like they were being excluded from mainstream gay spaces, which start becoming more popular because white people are becoming more accepting of queer identity. If we're thinking about Studio 54 and other spaces like that that supported that, some Black folks were felt excluded from that. But it definitely traces back to people like Gladys Bentley and Ma Rainey, right, who kind of set the stage and kind of broke those barriers for people to be able to come forward, to be public, to have their queer stylings, to be unapologetic, right? They definitely used fashion and performance. They challenged gender norms. You have some folks like Marcel Christian LaBeija, who hosted the first Black drag ball in 1962. Crystal and Lottie LaBeija from the House of LaBeija Ball in 1972. They were creating family, and they were voguing in competitions. And so let's look real quick at this. Voguing is a style of dance popularized by ballroom culture, but it definitely has deeper, more storied roots with inspiration from ancient Kemet. I always like to connect us to the past. So if you can look at these pictures and see some of the dance moves that people are doing, excuse me, you will see them replicated in voguing performances. Sorry, y'all. I don't know how the hell I got all the way back to that slide. I'm sorry, I'm getting there. But as you can see from the voguing video, and like I said, I like to have these pictures up because you can see from the writings on the wall, the literal writings on the wall. This is a direct line back to our ancient ways of being, right? Okay, and then as we start to wrap it up, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of like what it means to think about this, to be intellectual about this, to think about this academically. So one of the things I was starting to do was kind of look at developing this Afrocentric queer theory. And, like, what is queer theory? So queer theory itself is developed out of the 1990s, out of women's studies, gender studies, lesbian and gay studies. We've got folks like Gloria Anzaldúa, who was influenced by Foucault, Teresa DeLautis, Judith Butler, Adrienne Rith, right? Judith Butler gives us some of the greatest work on gender and questioning gender identity and things like that. But these are like white people. So how does that apply to us, right? And so Afrocentric oriented scholars have contributed significantly less to the discourses on sexuality when compared to the intellectual output of Black feminist oriented scholars and Black K-oriented scholars. Much of the output that Afrocentric-oriented scholars have on sexuality was produced decades ago. There has been very little critical engagement of the claims of Afrocentric-oriented scholar on sexuality from within the Afrocentric movement. The claims, suppositions, and arguments of the Afrocentric movement regarding Black sexuality are held by a significant number of Black folks or are consistent with the beliefs of significant number of Black folks. And this comes from H. Sharif Williams, The Introduction to Afrocentric Decolonizing Queer Theory and its Epistemology of the Erotic. And that is why I use the KWEER. So what does it mean for Black people to have, and African Americans to have their own kind of language and ways of thinking about queerness, right? And so I appreciated here that this was like a KWER, because we tend to add K's to things. I'm just gonna be honest, like Africa becomes like Africa with a K. Like we tend to do that. It is a subversive tactic. So I wanted to honor this particular person kind of really for bringing this conversation in. And then we have towards an African-centered sociological approach to Africana, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex identities, and the performances, the comedic model of cosmological interactive self. That's by Sekhmet Ra. Okay, we've got Afrocentricity of the whole, bringing women and LGBTQIA voices in from the theoretical margins. Hopkins and Myers, that's coming out of Howard University. Forging Paths and African Queer, is there African mechanism for realizing LGBTQ rights? And this is talking a lot about like what's going on in Africa. Most of the scholarship that we have around queer identity for Black people within like this kind of Afrocentric space is focused on the continent of Africa. And so what I'm saying is that we actually need to do more related here. That's why I did my piece on ballroom, because I was like, we have to start actually, Afrocentric scholars have to actually start doing this work around sexuality and gender. I have another chapter coming out in a book, on a textbook on Afrofuturism, in which I'm talking about gender and how I don't think that gender will be necessary in the Afrofuture. Like these are things that I've been working on because I'm trying to contribute to that. African sexuality and the legacy of imported homophobia. So we have this, there's always been this debate, is queerness among Black people something that Europeans forced onto us or something that's always been there? I hate that it's 2026 and people are still having this debate. But again, a lot of people refuse to acknowledge how they have internalized the homophobia. And in showing them grace, it is because of the sexual violence that Europeans have inflicted upon people of African descent. Yes, they did weaponize sex, especially against Black men, in terms of what we're talking about here. So there are people who believe that Black men are only gay because they've experienced sexual violence. We know that that is not true. We know that that's not necessarily how it works, but I understand why some folks would cling to that. So just kind of putting that out there. The way I like to think about modern queer identity, modern African-American queer identity, and yes, this can spread to others, but this is about African-Americans today. It must acknowledge all aspects of cultural identity. Something that we are seeing happening right now, which I believe is a direct result of the CIA and the FBI infiltrating social media, is that people are starting to pretend that they don't like being associated with Africa. Now, we used to have this before, but that was mostly ignorance. We are past ignorance at this point. There's no reason for any Black people in the United States to be talking about, I'm African. Yes, you are. You are African and you're always going to be African, okay? So I think that when we're talking about queer identity for African-American people, we cannot ignore our African cultural identity, right? We must affirm humanity and wholeness, right? We have to see all African-Americans as human beings. And when we are queer, we can't see queerness as a detriment. We can't see queerness as something that we have to get rid of. We have to embrace it as part of our wholeness. We have to reject European patriarchy and this fabricated white supremacy. Excuse me, that is for everyone across the board, though. So I just gonna throw that in there, right? And part of reason why I also put that in is because within Black families and Black communities, African-American, first gen, second gen, whatever it is, there tends to be this prioritization of heterosexual pairings and this kind of nuclear family. We all know the nuclear family comes from capitalism. So why are we embracing that as the norm, right? And that's all deeply rooted in European patriarchy. What we know with queer family building is that kinship is not required, like blood kinship is not required to make family happen. And so queer people have been showing us this for decades, that family can be built and sustained without adhering to this European patriarchy, right? You must honor your African roots. I've already said this, okay? Part of our queer identity must honor our African roots, must acknowledge that queerness has been eternal and it's nothing to shy away from. We must be rooted in education and informed opinions. This is very important to me because I think a lot of people make up ideas and speculate on things without having done the readings and without having studied the people that came before us. So when I just list all these people in this particular thing, I want you all to go study them. Make that your project for the rest of the month. I don't know. Go study those people. Modern African American queer identity might reject labels and boxes, right? Part of this kind of theorizing a new way of being is possibly rejecting lesbian, gay, transgender, things like that. All of these terms coming from white people, right? Same gender loving, for example, is created by a Black man. It is Afrocentric term that rejects this kind of binary of like, what is sex, male sex, female sex, whatever. Instead says gender, and it also conceptualizes gender as something that comes from within. And I'm saying that that gender that we understand that we have for ourselves must be rooted in our African ways of being and knowing. And if it's rooted in our African ways of being and knowing, then it is expansive, because gender in African history is expansive, right? I find that white people tend to be very binary with a lot of these ideas, right? They might be louder than others, right? For people who have been silenced for so long, African Americans today who are queer might actually just be louder. We might be more flamboyant. We might run down the aisle to go get a Grammy, that, those kinds of things. We might wear those bright colors wherever we do, right? Because we have the right to be here and to be seen and to be heard. And we might also decide that none of this works. And that's okay too. That nothing that people are saying about being trans or being gay or being lesbian or pansexual or whatever it is, we may decide that none of that actually works. And that's okay. And we're still trying to figure out how this applies to us. All right. And so finally, we've got some modern African American queer folks who are making some moves. And if you have any questions and want to start putting them in the chat, you can definitely do that, because we do have a delay. And so I will get to them. We've got James Black, we've got Raquel Willis, we've got Nadine Smith, we've got Larry Monty, we've got Angelica Ross, we've got Feminista Jones. We have people who are very actively trying to help their communities, trying to push forward with legislation, who are providing services to people in need, who are running organizations, who are challenging, using their privileges, maybe even to challenge what we think we know, to educate people and all these kinds of things. And this is just continuing on a long legacy of African American queer people speaking up for themselves and making determinations, and that is what it is. I recognize that I do not have necessarily any masculine coded people here, and that's because I don't want to. It's my class. I can do what I want to do. All right. So any questions? Any questions at all for anybody? Anybody have any questions? As you are thinking about those questions, I just want to thank you all so much. Like I said, this is probably going to be the longest one that I've done this month. There is so much that I but so much that I had to leave out. But my hope is that you walk away from this understanding the through line from ancient times until now, that cultural memory runs deep, that resistance is always within us. As long as freedom is not ours, we will always resist in different ways. Queer identity is absolutely subversive. It is resistance in so many ways, because we still live in a heteronormative, cisnormative world in society. Capitalism is threatened by queerness, right? So when you choose to live out loud, or if you choose to not live out loud, but you still engage in refusal, you may not tell people that you are a lesbian, but you don't marry no man. That is an act of what we call refusal. Refusal is resistance. And so it's really important just to see the ways in which we've done that, but also to recognize that queer people have been embedded in everything that African Americans have done, have fought for, have created, etc. And unfortunately, people get erased. One of the people that I didn't include extensively is Lorraine Hansberry. A lot of people know that she wrote Raisin in the Sun, but a lot of people don't know that she was a lesbian, right? And sometimes we downplay people's queerness because we still see it as something that takes away from them. And, or there's some of us who feel like, well, we can't celebrate and champion someone if they were gay or if they were queer. And we have to divest of that because it is incredibly harmful to all of us. Okay. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat unless my chat has frozen. I don't think it's frozen. But you know what? If you do have any questions, you can always like email me, contact@feministajones.com. I do have 3 more classes going for the rest of the month. Again, every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can come back and learn some more. Next week, we're going to do African American cinema, which I'm going to actually, you know what? That one might actually be long too. I try to keep them at an hour, but when I get passionate about talking about something, y'all know cinema is my thing. So tune in next Wednesday for African American cinema. You can go to feministajones.com/BHM26 if you have not yet registered for that one, or if you want to register for the whole series. As always, it is a pay what you can. You can pay $25 a class or $85 for the whole series, or you can just make a donation of whatever you have. If you don't have anything, if you only have $0, it's okay. We want you to sign up. Excuse me. There will be links for each class that'll take you right to the place where you can just go and sign up for $0. Listen, a lot of people are struggling right now, and that shouldn't get in the way of you being able to get this knowledge. And I just believe that the community will provide, and I've had people who have given more money to cover some of the other people. And maybe in a few months when you get back on your feet, maybe you'll drop me a couple of dollars if you want to. If you're not, it's okay. But that's what I'm here for. I'm here for education for liberation. I thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.